Hello everyone, welcome back to introducing the creative industries. So this week that we are on creative organization and creative labor. This is one of the lecture of the term which I'm always like really excited to get into. Personally that I have a research interest in this topic, and then also I think that it is quite crucial to get to know that if we want to have any more in-depth insight and analysis into the industry, which is knowing how it is structured, how it is organized, and then also what's so special, if anything, that about the people that work in those sectors. So before we move on to the lecture today, that we also have a little bit of admin to do. So as you all know, that midterm assignments is probably just, coming up to you very soon. So we will be also, before the class today, that I would like to walk you through about what is going to happen for our midterm assignment too. So let's get started. First, that we're looking at the first assignment of this module, which is also the midterm assignment. So the dates that we are going to have our presentations would be on the 18th of November and also the 25th of November, which is week 9 and week 10. We will be conducting the sessions real-time live on Google Meet without having recorded lecture like we usually do. So, and also that I want to actually show you again that the assessment, it would be a 10-minute oral presentation from each of you, and then a 350-word abstract written. So the topic would be, you can choose among one of those. And the first one would be choose one individual creative worker or a creative organization as a case study and analyze one of the following aspects critically. So those are the 4 aspects that you can look into. And as you can see that this week we are on the second creative labor. And we have already covered almost all of it in the lectures. So I think that would be a good time for you to actually think about, what topic that you want to address and then what aspect that you would like to analyze. The other presentation question that you can go for would be analyze the concept of policy making in relation to creative industries or creative economies of a country of your choice, and assess the impact of these policies on different stakeholders. So one hint that I would like to give you is that the questions which I designed for the course are incredibly broad. So, but they're incredibly broad for a reason. That the reason is that I would like you to choose something that you have genuine interest about, and then also that you can just shape it and then tailor it into the direction that you would like. So the first thing that I would like to encourage you to do is to narrow down the question in a way that you like. So you can define which creative worker or which organization that you would like to talk about, and then also what aspect of the relationship between business and art, or what aspect of the work cultures, for example, that you would like to take a look at, so that I think that you will come up with a more concrete idea about what you'll be focusing on for the first assessment. And coming back to how is it going to be conducted, that please do submit the abstract prior to the presentation date, and you can see all of the deadlines up here. And then also that we will be deciding that what order that you will be presenting, so you will know exactly which day and in what order that you will have to be sharing screen, and then also having the presentation done in front of the rest of the class. And then also I would also encourage the rest of you to be asking questions, giving feedback after the presentation of each of your classmates. And also how I will be marking your abstract and presentation. It would be abstract for 30 points, and then also a presentation for 70. So there would be like 100 in total. And then that I will also be marking them with this particular type of, structure. And then also the criteria that, as you can see. So for abstract, I will be looking for originality and relevance, quality, as well as state of completion and clarity. And for the presentation, that I would be looking for creativity and originality, quality, clarity, relevance, and delivery. So yeah, those would all be up on NTU on the slides, and then I will also email them to you again. And yes, and then we will be sorting out the order very soon too. So so if there's any other questions about how this is going to be, proceeded, and then any particular questions about, your own presentation, please also feel free to email me, and I'll be more than happy to respond to you. And so now we're back to today's lectures. Today we will be covering a few aspects of, creative organization as well as creative labor. We will be looking into what are creative organizations, and as well as the terms and conditions of cultural work, and the definition, and also the special kind of distinct features about creative labor. And then we'll be also looking into the features of contemporary creative employment, as well as we'll be having our discussions. So when we look at organizations, and especially creative organizations, what are their functions? One of the functions that they have would be managing creativity. So in a way that the management of symbolic creativity is a crucial part of the organizations. It's what they do. And according to Davis and Skase, that they come up with this type of typology, or like categorization, that they think there are 4 types of cultural and industry organizations. And they are categorized by 2 kind of like axes. The first one is the mechanisms of coordination, and the other axis is the mechanisms of control. So let's look at this. This is a typology of creative organizations, as we spoke about in the previous slide. So for the mechanisms of coordinations, that you can see this as like, there is explicit mechanism of coordination, and also there is implicit and tactic. So, and then for the mechanism of control, that there are also tendency to be formal and hierarchical, or informal and collegial. So there will be like, organizations that have explicit coordination, but also formal and hierarchical mechanism of control. And for that usually that it will be commercial bureaucracies. So when we think about it, specifically, large institutions that has a lot of different, departments and employees all within this like big corporate, that this would usually be categorized as this. And for the other type, which is with also explicit coordination, but informal mechanism of control, that it would usually come down to the traditional and charismatic type of organization. That if we want to come up with an example, that we could maybe think about such as dance group, that more established type of dance group, but also that is led by, a charismatic figure or the artist himself. Even though that it requires very explicit level of coordination, such as it will have its department of art administration, and then also within the dancers that it requires a high level of coordination as well. And so that would be one example for that. And then let's look into the more implicit mechanism of coordination. So there's less coordination, as we can see in those organizations. And if that it also comes with still that more formal and more hierarchical type of mechanism of control, what we could think of is cultural bureaucracy, such as we say foundations, museums potentially, and which that it doesn't actually require that much coordination within, but it has hierarchies, and it is like, the mechanism of control. It could be more top-down, could be more formal. So that would be potentially that what usually we refer to as cultural bureaucracy. But when we look at the organizations that with implicit mechanism of coordination and also informal mechanism of control, that we would potentially think of more, grassroots, bottom-up, or even network organizations, that this would be, still very important for the broader creative scenes. But they also tend to be smaller and then maybe more mobile, or even more, sort of like dynamic, and also it could be changing from time to time. So I think you can definitely think about organizations like this, that they could, for instance, be serving the purpose of, a place for creatives to network, to hang out, and then also to get to know each other, which is actually really important in the business, that we will be covering a little bit of that later as well. But also that you may see the direction of change, because the organization could evolve, organization could just change into, different pictures. So sometimes we do see that the network organizations moving towards the directions of becoming commercial bureaucracy. You could definitely think about the example like this, and we could probably see a lot of them in the success stories for, the creative organizations or business. So yeah, this is actually a good, typology that we can look at, that when we think about how we're going to analyze the organizations. So just as the other parts of today's lecture, that what I'll be doing is that I'll be providing you some of the framework or theoretical tools which you can make use of for your own, research and presentations. So as we already cover that the typology of creative organizations, that I would like you to kind of think about that where Disney will fall in this typology. Yeah, I guess that we could all agree that it is probably more suitable to be placed in, as a commercial bureaucracy. But also back in the day, it could start as a network organization, right? So for those of you who are interested in the history of Disney, or for those of you that already know about this, yeah, I would definitely like to learn more from you, and then also just to know how that you will analyze this company. And then the next one is that National Foundation of Arts and Culture. I think 国议会, the foundations that could, provide arts funding. Where does it fall? I think it would be quite clear that this organization falls probably under the, bracket of cultural bureaucracy. And I would also like to share with you a little bit about my own experiences working in, say, Sound City, the UK company, that it's indeed a small and medium, size enterprise, and it does sometimes feel like that it has evolved from a network organization gradually towards the commercial bureaucracy way. But I think we're still kind of like in the middle, that because for a small company that it still require a lot of coordination, that's for sure. But also that in terms of control, it's not really that high because everybody is running their own projects, and sometimes that we are reporting it back directly to the managing director already. So there is no such level of control, but I do think that it has something to do with like the size. And I have worked indirectly for Apple Music as a person to assess their playlist. So there is this, I'm the employee of this other company based in LA, that it does a lot of research and then also analytics for companies like that, like Apple. But for that, I think that there is no like really low level of coordination, because I basically just work as a freelance, and what I do is just I complete all the tasks like by myself. I don't actually interact with other, what they call is playlist specialist. I just don't get to. But also that there is a mechanism of control quite specifically, because in terms of what playlist I assess, which area of the playlist I was looking into, that it is all quite like controlled. And then also that you can just feel that like when you report back to something, and then when they when meaning that our managers that have to give you some feedback and so on and so forth, that there is a level of hierarchy and control, and then it could be quite formal. So yeah, so I think as a creative worker, this could also be a useful tool for you to analyze which type of creative organization that you're in. So inside of those creative organizations, that we also have different kind of work and different kind of roles. So according to Hasmandock and Baker, the communication scholars, which I think in today that we will be actually referring to quite a lot of their work, that there are 4 type of categories. So one is unskilled work. It doesn't sound very good, right? But later on that we will take a look at what specifically they meant by it. And technical work, and creative management, as well as symbol creators. So I think one important thing that we can see directly from the way that they categorize creative work is that not all the creative workers are symbol creators, but there are different kind of roles inside those organizations. So when we look at unskilled work, that what they meant is the humdrum but essential work. And this type of work actually, the amount of it actually increased after digitalization. So as we know that this could be covering a lot of things, like for instance, simple copy editing, and then also office type of work, ensuring that things are happening, answering the phone, and so on and so forth. But we can always argue that those type of work requires a lot of skill as well, because not everybody can do it. But also that we know that there will be a lot of places, unfortunately, in those sectors of unpaid internship and so on and so forth. But I think this is still a category that we could argue that exists, but also critically examine that if that's the best word to describe those roles. So the second category is the technical work. Technical work is interesting because this is actually the sector that is probably the most unionized. We know that in creative organizations that actually they don't actually have the tendency compared to some of the other industries to be unionized as much. But the technical sector actually might have this tendency more, generally speaking. But also it could be casualized for the technical work, and also it could be internationalized. So for instance, that animation companies in the US, such as Hanna-Barbera, have achieved huge economies by opening major offshore studio in not just Australia, but also in Taiwan. So you might not have heard of 宏广股份有限公司, Wong Film Productions, but in the 1970s and 80s, actually they have a lot of subcontracted work done for the big, animation films, including the Flintstones in the US. And Disney currently also is subcontracting the work to China and South Korea. So it is a bit like other sectors, really, that subcontracting from the US company to South Korea, China, and Taiwan are not, this is just not uncommon. And this actually happens in the creative industries as well. And one thing that we will have to take a look at would be those animators, and then also those potentially like engineers could be delivering technical work. And also, as I shared with you previously, for instance, that the work that I do for Sound City, that they are also subcontracting the app development and web development work to the studios in Taiwan. So in that way, those engineering's work were based in Taiwan, and the engineers are Taiwanese and are also like based in here, so that they are also conducting technical work for the company in creative industries. So yeah, technical work, we can generally, I think, imagine that they do exist, especially in these days when things are more, online and digitalized, that it plays a really important role in the creative organizations. And creative management, this might be something I think quite easy to kind of relate to as well. So for instance, publishing, that there will be commissioning editors, and in recording music industry, that there will be A&R personnel. These roles usually have a networked nature, that they have to know someone, and then they have to maintain that relationship, and through that network, those initiatives and their aims can be achieved. So when we think about the typical type of like manager role, that usually that they will fall into this category as well. Last but not least is the symbol creator. So one thing really special, but which is something I think we can all relate to, is that for symbol creators, their rewards are uneven. And also, it usually has a winner take it all type of tendency. When we look at trading financial reward and security with creative autonomy, that would be something I think is quite common. That also that when it comes to the creative workers who are symbol creators, that there are two areas of controversies. First of all, is the financial rewards. Is it fair? Is it not fair? Or is it a rip-off that they work so hard to create something, but it actually doesn't turn into, something that is rewarding and also is monetized. So I think we've mentioned this last week actually, that about how DCMS in the UK has launched an official inquiry into music streaming platforms. And the other area of controversies would be creative autonomy, which is the level of commitment shown by a company to creators' output. So the economists have always been trying to get to know that in creative sectors or creative industries, that what are the relationship between earnings and talent. So back in 1981, Rosen has come up with this superstar model. So Rosen believed that when the talents are high, like, high, and then their earnings should be more. So, but obviously, I think today that we don't think that it actually, work, because we do see people with really high talent but don't get noticed much, and we also see some artists that they might not be, the talent might not be necessarily their strength, but also that they come up with a lot of earnings. So we can definitely think about a lot of examples like that, right? But one thing that I think a lot of economists back in the days have been coming up with, their theories would be, even Adam Smith would acknowledge that when he looks into opera business, that he said there's a tendency that winners take all in terms of the financial reward. And then Taos also come up with the idea of income penalty, that he meant that by that a lot of the symbol creators were highly trained, and but also that the income doesn't actually come with that amount of training, or the amount of time that they invested in their skills. So in what way that they got penalized for receiving training even more. And also that later on that scholars like Menger also suggest that it is actually important for the artist or the creative or the symbol creators themselves to also be entrepreneurial, because they actually have to understand how to communicate what they have, and then also to come up with a specific type of business model that fit them, that suit them. And so the graph was just an example of the musicians and artists that in the US, that how much that they earn, and then in which sectors. So as you can see, that this is just an example for music for sure, but the top earning artists, that they earn most of their income from touring these days. But I actually would like to mention something really interesting about Adele, because you can see Adele's name on it, right? I think last week that we might have mentioned that a little too, that how Adele has achieved high income that year specifically without any touring, because she wasn't on the tour, but she has it incredibly high, higher than anyone else on the chart, recorded music sales. And as you know, that Adele is about to release her second album, right? So it's actually a good time to take a look at that, what it will mean for her and then also for the market, because the last album she released was in 2015, and it was just at the turning point of streaming becoming the the major source of revenue for recorded music. And yeah, so now like a lot of analysts were actually looking into that, and I'm personally quite excited about that too. Yeah, it's just a lot to observe. So next, I would like to share with you about different scholars and how they would approach creative labor, not just the concept of it, but also that their conditions, and also the environment and circumstances that they face. So it is widely referred to as conceptual work rather than instrumental work. And also that creative satisfaction seems to be something that a lot of scholars would emphasize as well, that it is basically saying that creative work comes up with some kind of satisfaction that is special and unique. And also the dynamic between arts and commerce, and some would even say dilemma, or the conflict, has been analyzed a lot in the relevant literature as well. The other thing that would be mentioned quite a lot is the importance of networking for creative labor, that especially when that people might have the same level of talent and can deliver work in pretty much similar quality. And so that's when actually getting to know people seem to be really important in these sectors. Next, that Ursel, a scholar, also have identified a few things that he considered quite special about creative labor. The first thing is that the creative labor usually have a stronger sense of enjoyment and self-expression and self-realization when it comes to talking about their work. And then also that they seem to have a high level of commitment for whatever they do, which can be exemplified by the blurring line between work and life. This is not necessarily a good thing, because that it means that they might not have actual time off, but also that it seems to be a very common picture for the creatives, regardless of which type of creative worker that they are. But I think there is so much to analyze about, if we think about different kind of creative workers, and then also considering all those scholars describe about their circumstances scenario, which type have stronger tendency to be that, and which type might have some differences. I think this is something that worth further discussion, and I'm hoping that in the discussion later on Google Meet that we'll get to talk about that too. Next, according to Hasmendoch and Sarah Baker, that the creative labor also have usually several jobs simultaneously, and they have short-term contracts, they have unstable income, and also they are under anxiety and fear of what if they never get to work again. Because it's very obvious that if they are working based on short-term contracts, that potentially that they have employer that may come back to them next time, but they may not if something goes wrong. So one thing interesting that Hasmendoch and Baker also mentioned is that it is actually quite an extreme condition of creative labor would have to be socializing for networking purpose, but at the same time be quite isolating in terms of actually doing the work. So yeah, I do think that this is something interesting to look into, and then also it helps us to understand a bit more about the mentality and then of creative labor potentially, and then also the circumstances and difficulties that they face. Next thing that I will come to is that it is also widely, discussed and referred to, which is the concept of casualisation. Creatives usually that would face the circumstances of flexible specialization, which means that they could be doing very different things flexibly, such as a concert promoter could also be, someone who has to do photography at live events. And also that they have this tendency to be producing whichever cultural products that they come up with independently. And also that there could be collaborative network for those events, because one person might have to work with 3 other person to make an event work. And then also their work is usually project oriented. So one project done, and then you move on to maybe another. But at the same time, you might be doing 3, 4, 5 projects all in once. And then one day you might not have any projects. So yeah, so there's a little bit of uncertainty in terms of your work. when it is usually casualized. And creative labor, a lot of them are freelancers. And also a lot of those work can be outsourced. So, but Murdoch's analysis here, I think it applies more to symbol creators than others. But at the same time, technical work can be extremely casualized too. So yeah, so it really depends on what type of work. But I do think that those analyses still provide a good, framework for us to get a sense of how we analyze creative workers.
So I want to give you an example of symbol creators' revenue streams and how that we have to specifically take a look at which stage their career is, and then basically that how well they do in terms of which income group that they are in, because it actually change a lot in terms of where those streams of income came from, even though that they might all be facing, an environment that is full of casualized work, short-term contract, project oriented type of work conditions. So to take musicians as an example, that we see that the top earning musicians actually have more revenue from composing than the rest. And then also that we see that for the musicians that don't earn that much, that session work seems to be a major source of income, at least like compared to the rest of the sectors. So this is actually just an example of how that when we talk about the financial reward of symbol creators or other creative workers, that it is something to take into consideration. And then next, that still that we take musicians as an example. The revenue streams also differ for different type of genre. So I think this is not just about music, but also that when we have a look at, say, animation or films or documentaries or different sectors or design, the visual arts and so on and so forth, that those, it actually, the way that the, revenue streams are composed, that it actually has a lot to do with the genres that they're in. So, for instance, that the classical musicians that seem to have most of their income from salary, because they might be hired by a professional orchestra, and also that for the rest of the genres, such as jazz musicians, that they might have more income from session work than the rest. So it is also quite important when we analyze creative workers and their work. It is quite important to take genres into account, and then so that we'll be able to have a more specific focus on what they do and how to analyze, how to approach it.
So now that we are having our first discussion of the day, and I will give you 5 minutes to think about it, or if you want to, you can comment and write something on NTU Cool. I would like to invite you to think about the creative workers that you know or you know of. That what are their experiences at work? We just actually discuss quite a lot of the, what other people say, what the scholars says about their circumstances at work. And I've listed them all over again about the dimensions and the things that we have already, covered in the class so far. And do you think that it speaks to their circumstances and their, the environment that they're in right now? What are their experiences at work? And then also, is there something else that you can identify or you can point out about being a creative worker? Then if you do, that's great. And then we will also leave some time for this when we do our Google Meet discussion as well. So just as usual, I will give you 5 minutes, and then we will be continue the rest of our lecture. For this part of the lecture, I would like to introduce you to some of the more latest literature and discussion about creative labor. And then lately, of course, that COVID-19 has been the center of a lot of, conversations. And creative labor is actually no exception. So there has been a lot of reports, research, and also surveys and news articles about how vulnerable the creative labor has become under the impact of COVID-19. And I've actually had uploaded the article to NTUIB as well, for those of you who are interested in wanting to take a look at how this research was done, that the scholars actually are arguing that after that they reviewing different research commission or sponsored by different countries and regions, that they argue that positions creative, this is cultural and creative workers, concern as structural issues is very important. It's actually they are being vulnerable not just as a result of COVID-19. So what they do is that they present existing literature alongside meta-analysis of the recent surveys. And they revealed that while policy and sectoral concerns are valid, that they're in many ways investigating the structural issues of CCW, which stand for Cultural and Creative Workers, which are now becoming increasingly visible, but have always been present. So it means that there is actually a risk of presenting those issues as directly and only relevant to COVID-19. But there are actually a lot of long-term issues of sustainability and sustainable livelihood, which is beyond the immediate impact, and it is not made explicit enough. So, and then also that there have been more and more literature and discussions about the tendency of creative workers tend to self-exploit. And yes, I think to this point that there have been a lot of researchers and scholars have made that very explicit already, which is creative workers love to have the sense of satisfaction. They love to have a certain sense of, achieving certain things, which some other careers might not be able to have. And then also they have to be spontaneous. They have to, as they're mostly freelance based, that they have to say yes to work a lot because they're always in fear of not having work again. So they have this tendency to self-exploit. But also that they have this tendency to be duped by the seductive yet false promise of self-expressive and self-realizing jobs. Creative workers tend to accept low-pay, dismal labor conditions and lack of benefits. I'm sure that for those of you who have been working in the industries that you might have in this place, I have certainly several times. And yeah, so this is actually something I think in the discussion that we could also talk about, and not in a way that it works like a group therapy or something, but yeah, I think a lot of creative workers would probably identify with that and tell you that they have been there. But should this be the focus of all of the literature about and discussion about creative industry? Maybe not as much, because the more that we think about it as that way, that the more that we might identify with the fact that creative workers seems to be operating on a very individualistic way. But some other researchers have also looked into draw the idea of care and potentially like community and interpersonal connectedness into the picture. So drawing on the ethics of care approach, that some scholars also approach that the creative work represents a distinct form of other-centered work rather than just being, self-centered, or labor of care in which interpersonal connectedness, relationality, and attentiveness to the vulnerability of others are fundamental characteristics of work. So now let us pause and think about what they're trying to say here. I think this could generally refer to the according to Hasmandock and Baker, unskilled worker, because they have to always relate to others and having this international interpersonal skills, and also potentially symbol creators as well. So it's across different kind of categories, because they, in a way, that they have to know that what their clients want, regardless of the clients are their patrons or potentially funders and foundations. So this relationality seems to be something that is also quite special about creative workers. Also, there has been discussion, which is not really that latest, but it has been lasting for a very long time, that in the UK politics context, which I think is relevant to this, development of creative economy all along, and then also the policy around it, which is a new Labour government around late 90s, that they've been driving a neoliberal creative economy. It means basically in a neoliberal creative economy, that creative economy should be driven not by public funding, but the private sectors. This is like a generalization of the policy, but it does have a tendency of that. McRobin and some other scholars still have criticism over it. McRobin has said that the attempt to make over the world of work into something closer to a life enthusiasm and enjoyment is the problem of this kind of neoliberal creative rhetorics and discourse. And McRobin also said that this is basically a movement of a new youth-driven meritocracy. Because that youth is so important in terms of, creative work. And then also that they are usually the front face of, change, of a lifestyle that is appealing. But also there is a sense of meritocracy in it, because when it comes to how unstable the essence of the work is, that it is actually usually the one who will have a good, economic foundation, or the ones that have more social capital or actual capital will be able to make it. So McRobin also said that if it's full of labor of love and self-exploitation, why the new labor-driven neoliberal creative economy and all the discourse around it seem to make it look pretty and make it more about enthusiasm, enjoyment, rather than, pointing out the harsh reality. I want to give you an example that happened last year that really made me think a lot. So when the rest of the world and, maybe Taiwan was in a very special place at the time, but when everywhere in the world have been influenced by COVID-19 coronavirus, that there has been a lot of discussion in the UK about creative workers, because their chancellor appears to suggest that struggling musicians should get a new job. Why he was asked about, how do we help the musicians out when they don't get to play live, and so on and so forth. And we also see an ad of Cyber First, which is a government-backed body, that the ad seems to suggest that a dancer, Fatima, which is her name on the ad, his next job could be in cyber. And because now she's a dancer and she's not supposed to do that. That's not actually a proper job, that she should move into some other sectors. So for us, I think what we can read into is that the creative workers are also vulnerable because of the things that they do don't necessarily be seen as a job. And since it's not really a job, that there seems to have less protection over it. And when you think about how difficult it is to unionize actors and musicians, and also how that, yes, those unions do exist in a lot of countries, but they're still more vulnerable than a lot of the other sectors. So that's something I think we could all think about, and also maybe do some of our own research after class. Now, it's finally the time for our Google Meet discussion. What I would like you to do is actually also a practice for your midterm assignment, the first assignment of the module, which is I want you to choose one creative organization or one individual creative worker, and then we will analyze the following aspects critically, and which is I want us to focus on creative labor and work cultures this week, because that's what we kind of focus on. And so what we will do is that I would like you to maybe find take some note about the creative organizations that you think of, and also maybe just reflect back to what's been covered in the lecture today, and then we'll all have a discussion. And for today's session, that I will encourage all of you to say something. And yeah, I think that would be great. So we'll go around, and then all of us share something. And then if you want to give feedback to one another, we can do that too. So I will leave it here, and I will be very excited to see you on Google Meet.